Your first self-titled album came out in the early 70s. Does it still hold a special place in your heart?
Well, you know, all of my albums hold a different place in my heart. I was talking last night with my sweetheart about that, and you know, he said that he had been listening to Anticipation while he was working out. I don't think of that as a workout album, but he said he was listening to it, and he thought that it was probably his favorite of my albums. And I said, I think I agree with you. I think that's my favorite album. When I'm asked what my favorite of my albums is, that's the most singularly of a piece album. My first album was piecey. I thought that some of it was very good and some of it was not good at all. Does it hold a special place in my heart? Of course, because it was my first album.
The cliche is that you have your whole life to write your first album and then 6 months to write your second. Did that apply to you, do you feel?
I think I had... That's right. I think I had 9 months, maybe. But the second album came so much more easily, and it had so much more direction. The first album, Eddie Kramer was absolutely great, but we had major fights in the studio, and thankfully, after That's the Way I've Always Heard It Should Be, which he was involved in the mix, I mean, he did do the mix, I mean, we just couldn't get along, and so he left, and I was left to mix it with Dave Palmer, who was the engineer, who was very good, but I kept on saying, less echo, less echo. And so it sounds very different. If you listen to Dan My Fling, it sounds really different from That's the Way I've Always Heard It Should Be.
My father sits at night with no lights on.
The song well, there are 3 songs that I love the most on that album, and one is That's the Way I've Always Heard It Should Be, which was, of course, the first hit I ever had, and it's a truly, I think, charmed song. And another one is the song I wrote with Billy Murnett, which is called Reunions.
Oh, I love that one.
Which I just think is just a great, great song. And the other one is The Love's Still Growing, which is a Buzzy Lenhart song.
You know what? I think we're going to play the composer's version with your permission on Mixed Bag Radio.
Oh, I think that's a great idea.
Buzzy Linhart's recording of his own composition, The Love's Still Growing, a song you may know from Carly Simon's debut album. More with Carly on Mixed Bag Radio in just 1 minute. Pete Fornatale back with you on Mixed Bag Radio with a memory test for my guests, Carly Simon. Memory test number 1. Your second album, Anticipation, was produced by Paul Samuel Smith. One of his other artists was Cat Stevens,
yes.
And there was a time, you once told me that the old WNEW-FM was a very important radio station in your life. Before your first album, you said in your apartment in New York, you would literally have it on. I don't think the phrase 24/7 existed back then, but you would listen to the station 24/7.
It's the only radio station that I had that relationship with ever. And the only one that comes close is now WMVY
on the Vineyard.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because I have a relationship with all of the DJs, and that's the way that I get into radio. I don't get into radio if I don't know the DJs.
Well, here's memory test number 1. I'm doing my midday show one afternoon when you're either working on that album or it's already out, and you call on the station hotline. There's always a hotline for the VIPs, and you said to me, I'm making lunch for Cat Stevens, and I'm trying to convince him that I'm a witch. Could you play blank? And it was what you were making him for lunch. Do you remember what record you requested? Gotcha.
You did get me. You did get me. I was trying to... Yeah, because he liked witches. He did. And I mean, I've got so many... I've got so many stories about Cat Stevens, but my God, I don't remember what it was. Let's see, what could it have been? It must have been on that album.
Actually, it was by a completely other artist than you or he. You must have made some pretty good hot chili, I'm guessing. The Steve Miller Band on Mixed Bag Radio.
No.
Hot chili, by the way.
Oh, no!
I wonder if he bought into your
I don't
witch.
think is that for real?
Oh, absolutely. Did you cook chili in those days?
Yes, I made a fantastic chili. I can't believe that. I can't believe that you remember that. Because you know what? I mean, I'll tell you an equally alarming story.
Ooh.
Is that 2 years ago, it happened to be my birthday, June 25th, and I got a call that woke me up in the morning, and it said, "Hello, Carly, this is Yuslev." And I hung up. I said, "I'm sorry, I don't know a Yusef," and I hung up. And then he called back again, and he said the same thing. And he said, "This is Yusef Islam. I knew you from a long time ago." I said, "I'm sorry, I don't know you," and I hung up.
Wow.
And then he called back a third time. And he said, "Carly, this is Yusef Islam." He never said Cat Stevens. He said, "Don't you remember we played at the Troubadour together and you opened for me at Carnegie Hall?" I said, "Oh my God, it's you." I said, "It's you, it's you, it's you. I can't believe it." I said, I just broke into tears. I said, "I love you. I loved you then. I love you now, and I'll always love you. I can't believe you called. Did you know it was my birthday?" Because his birthday, I remember, is July 6th or July 5th. And I thought that he was remembering my birthday. I said, "Did you remember it was my birthday?" And he said, No. I've just been thinking about you so much." And I said, I just can't believe it. I haven't, because I hadn't spoken to him in maybe 25 years, and certainly not since he had become Yusef Islam. And he told me that he had taken up the guitar again because he'd bought his son a guitar, and that he'd started to play it, and that he started to write songs again, and that he was just thinking about me, and we just had this wonderful talk, and which I avowed my undying love for him forever. And he told me that he was working with children in the north of England, and that, just how misunderstood he had been, and how it was not long after, I guess, he had been kicked off the plane.
Right. Yeah.
And so then when I recorded Into White, I sent it to him by email, and he said he loved it. I had asked Paul Samuel Smith to produce that album, just because of, I wanted the sound on that album to be very much like Anticipation. Mm-hmm. I think Jimmy Parr and myself really got that sound on Into White, but without drums. It was just a little.
You know better than most that there's no such thing as coincidence. He was supposed to call you on your birthday.
It was.
You know that.
It was definitely.
He's responsible for one of your hits in an odd way.
Well, he was
right?
responsible for that whole album. He was responsible for all of Anticipation. That whole album. He played and sang on it, where he's not credited. And
there was an incident, though, connected to the title song. Am I right?
You're right. I was. I had opened for him in Los Angeles, which was the beginning of a bewitchment on my part, having nothing to do with the chili. And when we got to New York, I invited him, or he invited me out, or whatever. It was our first date, our first real date, which didn't have anything to do with playing music on stage. And I was waiting for him at my apartment, and I was so nervous. I didn't know what I was going to say to him. I didn't know how to have a date with him. It's hard to have dates. And so, I was just really sweating it out. And I was sitting on my bed playing the guitar. And in the time that between the beginning of those nerves and the time that the doorbell rang, I wrote the song Anticipation.
And that just about does it for this edition of Mixed Bag Radio, Part 1 of our visit with Carly Simon. My thanks to Carly for being our guest.